Welcome to the Handy Hudsonite. Today I'm going to be showing you how to remove and install the control arm on your vehicle. I'm going to be working on my 2004 Honda Odyssey, but the principles of this are going to apply to most vehicles. So I'm going to show you how I did that, the supplies and tools involved, and exactly how to tighten down the bolts, the torque specifications. The control arm is located back here behind the wheel assembly, and what it does is it connects the frame of the car to the wheel assembly, and it brings stability to the driving experience. Now, if you've noticed that you have some movement in the steering wheel when you go over bumps, and that just some unstableness in cornering, those could be indications that your control arms are wearing out. Now, one of the ways that you can check the control arms, and I'll show you this later in the video, is to check the bushings. There are two bushings, and then there is a lower ball joint that connects into the wheel assembly here. So what we want to do is we want to just remove the entire control arm and replace it with the new one. Now, you can replace the lower ball joint and the bushings if you have a press tool, the proper press tools to do it. I chose to just replace the whole control arm. It's faster. It's actually not much more expensive to get the entire control arm. So I'll be showing you how to do that in this video. So in order to replace the control arms on your vehicle, particularly a Honda Odyssey, you're going to need a number of tools. And if you don't have these tools, don't worry. You can always borrow them from a neighbor. There's actually one tool on here that I borrowed from my local auto parts store. And again, check out my video on how to shop for auto parts online, and I'll put that up here and also in the description. So let's start with some of the basics. You're going to need gloves. I like to use gloves just to keep my hands clean. Some towels. Looks like I'm going to need some new ones soon. Some silicone. I use silicone to spray down the lower ball joint. I've actually already applied these two things to the vehicle. We also want to use penetrating oil to help loosen up the bolts. Sometimes they get seized, and I've already applied that as well. And make sure to be safe. Use ear protection if you're using an impact wrench, which I will be. And then a light helps. Eye protection, of course. And then we're going to get into removing the bolts. And if you don't have an impact wrench, then it's good to get a breaker bar. These come in really handy for just getting bolts off. In fact, this longer one has been able to get bolts off more than my impact wrench on some occasions. Here's a smaller breaker bar for tighter spots. Just have a normal ratchet wrench. When we go to reinstall a couple of the bolts, this one will just speed up the job. You get a pry bar. Here's a small one for helping to place the control arm back on when we install it. And then here's a larger a larger pry bar, so that that helps to remove the ball joint from the knuckle. Now we're going to need some tools to get that bolt off of the ball joint, and the bolt actually takes a 17 millimeter, but I have a couple of wrenches because you may want to use them for leverage, and I'll show you how I do that. This here is to just help with removing and reinstalling the pin on the bolt that goes on the ball joint. You may want to use a pick tool. This helps to get that pin off of the ball joint bolt. This is just to clean up any rust or build up on the bolts after you take them out. This is actually blue thread locker. I don't know why they put it in a red container, but it is blue, as you can see there. This is to reinstall on the bolts so that it just kind of helps hold them tight. There's also a red thread locker that's more permanent. You don't need that for this job. I have a hammer. This is kind of a heavy-duty hammer. This helps to use this tool, and this is what I rented from my auto parts store. It is a pickle tool, and this is used to remove the ball joint, which I'll show you how we do. Let's see if I covered it. I also brought out my impact driver. This is not an impact wrench, just a driver. It just helps with pulling one of the bolts off quicker, just to speed up the job where my impact wrench can't fit, because my impact wrench is a lot longer. So there's a little overview of the tools. The part I'm going to be using is Moog. I like Moog for suspension, and this particular part is, I can lift it. This particular part, this is for the passenger side, so RK620325, and so it's also referred to as the right side of the vehicle. That can be confusing sometimes. Let's go get this done. Okay, so here we are looking at the lower ball joint of the control arm. This is where we're going to begin. We have to get this pin. Okay, so you use this pick tool to remove the part over here, because it wraps around and it should just pull right out. So there's the pin, and this piece here is what wraps around the nut so that it can hold it in place in case the nut were to come loose. So make sure to set that aside. I like to use this more than the one that Moog sends, which is just a bendable pin. I like to be able to use a tray, some sort of a metal tray, to keep the bolts in so I don't lose them. Okay, like I said, this is a 17 millimeter. You want to make sure to turn it counterclockwise, you know, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. And I was able to use it just with this wrench, but if it's too tight, what you can do, I'll just show you. You can get another wrench and loop it through here for some leverage when you're turning the other wrench. Another thing you can do is, if you have a pipe that is wide enough to go over this, you can use a pipe for more leverage. But I know with mine, it was enough leverage just to use the actual wrench. And this bolt is actually loose enough that I can just hand loosen it. Now I'm not going to take it all the way off. The reason being is because when we go to separate the ball joint here, I want to make sure this doesn't fly off. So I do have it threaded, a few threads still. Okay, this is where we want to use our pickle tool to get at this, and you want to place this in between the knuckle and the boot. Now keep in mind that this particular tool is going to damage the boot, so if you're planning on reusing this lower ball joint, I would not use this pickle tool. There's another ball joint separator tool that will not damage the boot here, but since we're not going to be reusing it, it doesn't matter. So you just slide that in there and then you pound it. There we go. Okay, so a little bit of pounding. As you can see, the ball joint is now free, so we no longer need, that's all you need the pickle tool for, and they said as long as I return it within about 48 hours, they'll give me my money back. Okay, so we've got that separated, and before we take that off, I want to loosen the other bolts. This is the bolt that's in the bushing that's oriented horizontally back here, and I'm actually going to use my impact wrench to get this off. You can also use hand tools, but it will take you a lot longer. You could hand loosen this, but it would take you a while, so I'm just going to use my socket wrench. take out the other bolt, which makes the job very easy. Okay. You can see that comes right out. You want to make sure you don't confuse these bolts. As you can see, they are different sizes. The shorter bolt goes into the bushing that is towards the back of the car, the vertical one, and the longer bolt goes in the bushing that's horizontal towards the front of the vehicle. Now I will take out this castle nut. This is where you want to use your crowbar to remove the ball joint there. Okay, the trick to this, once you have the ball joint free, is pull out of there and then swing it and it'll come right out. My ball joint is shot, and I'll show you just all the cracking in this bushing here. This bushing looks okay, but there's definitely some dry rot in there. So if you wanted to press out these bushings in the ball joint and reuse the control arm, you definitely could, but for simplicity and just a quick repair, I'm going to use a new one. You want to take a look at your bolts, and if you have any sort of corrosion on it, this one actually looks okay. Any rust, which these can develop rust, you want to make sure to get that off. This one has more corrosion because it's more downward facing towards the road, so it's going to get a lot more buildup, and you want a good wire brush, like I mentioned, to get that corrosion off, or that rust, just so that it will seat in there properly and tighten down properly. Now what we want to do, what I like to do, is just apply the thread locker. You just have to put a little bit on the top of the bolt and it'll work its way through when you put it on. Just put it on the threads of both bolts. Alright, here's our new control arm, and when it comes from the factory, you're going to have a cover, at least on these. You want to remove that. You do not want that to be installed in the vehicle. You need to get it in this vertical unit here first, and then you're going to swing it around. So you want to get it in here. It's a little tricky to get this lined up in here. Not bad. You gotta get the bottom and the top aligned. And this is where you're gonna want to use a socket wrench. Okay, I'm just gonna make that snug for now, and I'll show you why here in a little bit. Now we have it here. Now we can, what we want to do is lift it into this area. Just got to slide it in there. Be careful again of the boot down here. Now we're gonna install this bolt. Now to get this bolt in, you're gonna have to, that's where this trusty pry bar comes into play. You want to lift this up until it's lined up. You might need to push on the front of the control arm here a little bit too. Just get it lined up. It's pretty close. There we go. Now you want to make sure You might need to lift up on this again to get it lined up on the other side. It's hard to tell. And again, I'm going to get my socket wrench so I can get this thing seated. See if it's going to go in. Oh, it is going through. I don't know if you can see it, but you can see the bolt coming out the other side. I'm just going to make it snug, not too snug. What we need to do is we need to take the load off of this assembly, so we need to lift it up, and then we're going to torque down these bolts. Now these bolts on my Honda Odyssey torque down to 69 foot-pounds, and this castle nut is 51 foot-pounds. And if you're using the method where you put the pin through the center of the bolt, because this bolt has holes in it, then you're going to want to snug it up to below 51 foot-pounds and then tighten it. Unfortunately, my torque wrench doesn't fit in here. There's not enough room. I'm going to have to just kind of gauge it with my wrench. Now we have to get this in here. Get that lower ball joint bolt in. We got it in now. I'm just finger tightening this bolt. Okay, just gonna snug that up. What I'm doing is I'm taking the load off of the assembly. And you want to lift this up until it comes off of your jack stand. Alright, so the load is now off of my jack stand, and what we're going to do is we're going to tighten these bolts the rest of the way. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to tighten these to 69 foot-pounds. And be sure to watch my video on how to use a torque wrench so you know how to do this, how to properly set it. Okay, so that's tightened to 69 foot-pounds. Let's tighten the other one. Forgot to mention, you're going to need a wobble extension. It's good to have an extension like this with a wobble. You notice by the kind of the rounded appearance of the end. Okay. And like I mentioned before, with the castle nut here, since my torque wrench can't fit in here, I've just got to tighten this to what I feel like is going to be close to 51 foot-pounds. We'll insert the pin. Okay, so that pin is secure. Let's take this down. Okay, so that's how you remove and replace the control arm on your vehicle. And if you have any questions or any tips that you have for me, be sure to leave them in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you can get up to date when my content goes up. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next video.